He sacrificed his meal for an old couple and their baby. Next day, a billionaire CEO knocked on his door. What happened next will restore your faith in humanity forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this with your friends because this tale will touch your heart in ways you never expected. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives on these amazing real-life moments. Marcus Williams was just another face in the crowd, another 17-year-old trying to make it through each day in the bustling streets of downtown Chicago. His worn sneakers had holes that let in the October chill, and his jacket, a hand-me-down from his older brother who'd left for the military, hung loose on his thin frame. But today was different. Today, Marcus clutched $15 in his pocket, money he'd saved from 3 weeks of odd jobs around the neighborhood. $15 that represented hope, dignity, and his first real meal in days. The Golden Spoon Diner sat wedged between a laundromat and a pawn shop on Ashland Avenue, its neon sign flickering intermittently in the gray afternoon light. Marcus had walked past this place countless times, always peering through the steamed windows at families sharing meals, couples laughing over coffee, businesspeople grabbing quick lunches. Today, he would finally be one of them. Today, he would sit at a real table, order from a real menu, and eat like a normal person instead of scrounging for leftovers behind grocery stores. The bell above the door chimed as Marcus stepped inside, immediately hit by the warm aroma of grilled onions and fresh bread. His stomach growled so loudly he was certain everyone could hear it. The diner buzzed with the usual lunch crowd, construction workers in hard hats, office employees on their break, elderly regulars nursing cups of coffee while reading newspapers. Marcus found an empty booth near the window and slid across the cracked vinyl seat, his hands trembling slightly as he opened the laminated menu. Meatloaf special, $8.50, he whispered to himself, running his finger down the list of options. Chicken sandwich, $7.25. Soup and salad combo, $6.99. Each price felt like a small victory. He could actually afford these things. For the first time in months, Marcus felt like he belonged somewhere. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, approached his table with a warm smile. "What can I get you, honey?" "The meatloaf special, please," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And a Coke, if that's okay." "Coming right up, sweetheart." She scribbled on her notepad and headed toward the kitchen, leaving Marcus to bask in the simple pleasure of being a paying customer. That's when the door chimed again, and everything changed. An elderly couple shuffled in, the man supporting a frail woman who cradled a small bundle against her chest. The baby couldn't have been more than 6 months old, and even from across the diner, Marcus could see something was wrong. The infant's face was flushed with fever, its tiny body limp in the grandmother's arms. The couple's clothes were threadbare, their shoes held together with duct tape, and desperation radiated from them like heat from a furnace. "Please," the old man said to the hostess, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "We just need some food for the baby. Maybe some milk, or soup. We can work for it, clean tables, wash dishes, anything." The hostess, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, looked them up and down with obvious disgust. "This is a restaurant, not a charity kitchen. If you can't pay, you need to leave." "Sir, please," the grandmother spoke up, her voice barely audible. "The baby hasn't eaten in 2 days. She's so sick, and we just—" "I said leave." The hostess's voice cut through the diner's chatter like a knife. Conversation stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Every eye in the place turned toward the unfolding drama. "We don't serve beggars here. You're disturbing our paying customers." Marcus watched in horror as the old man's shoulders sagged in defeat. The grandmother began to cry silently, her tears falling onto the baby's fevered forehead. They turned toward the door, moving with the slow, painful gait of people who had nowhere else to go. Something inside Marcus snapped. Maybe it was the memory of his own hunger, the countless nights he'd gone to bed with an empty stomach. Maybe it was the way the baby's tiny hand reached weakly toward nothing, or the broken look in the grandfather's eyes. Whatever it was, Marcus found himself standing up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Wait," he called out, his voice stronger than he'd ever heard it. The couple stopped, turning back with confused hope in their eyes. Marcus walked over to them, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. "Please, sit at my table. Order whatever you need." The hostess stepped forward, her face red with anger. "Young man, you can't just." "I'm paying," Marcus said firmly, pulling out his crumpled bills. "They're my guests." The old man stared at Marcus with tears in his eyes. "Son, we couldn't possibly." "Please," Marcus insisted, gently guiding them toward his booth. "Let me do this." As the couple settled into the seats across from him, Marcus felt something he'd never experienced before, a warmth that had nothing to do with the diner's heating system. The grandmother looked up at him with such gratitude that it took his breath away. "What's your name, Angel?" she whispered. "Marcus," he replied, settling back into his seat. "And you don't need to thank me. We're all just trying to get by, right?" The waitress returned with Marcus's meatloaf, her expression confused as she took in the new seating arrangement. Marcus quickly explained the situation, and to his relief, her kind eyes softened with understanding. "What can I get for your friends, honey?" Marcus looked at his $15, then at the baby's flushed face. "Whatever they need," he said without hesitation. "And maybe some milk for the little one." The grandmother's weathered hands shook as she accepted the warm bottle of milk, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "Bless you, child," she whispered, testing the temperature against her wrist before gently coaxing the baby to drink. The infant's tiny lips barely moved, but she managed a few sips before turning her head away weakly. "Her name is Emma," the grandfather said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's our daughter's baby. Our daughter, she passed last month, and we've been trying to care for Emma ever since." His words hung heavy in the air, and Marcus felt his chest tighten with sympathy. The waitress brought over bowls of chicken soup and fresh bread, along with a small container of baby formula. Marcus watched his $15 disappear, but instead of regret, he felt something profound, a sense of purpose he'd never known before. The elderly couple ate slowly, savoring each spoonful while taking turns trying to feed Emma small amounts of broth. "You remind me of my grandson," the grandmother said to Marcus between bites. "He would have done the same thing. Always putting others before himself." She paused, her eyes distant. "He's overseas now, serving his country." Marcus nodded, pushing his own untouched meatloaf toward the center of the table. "Please, share this too. I'm not that hungry anyway." It was a lie, his stomach was cramping with hunger, but seeing the relief on their faces made it worthwhile. For 20 minutes, the booth became a small island of warmth in the bustling diner. The grandfather, whose name was Harold, told Marcus about his 40 years working at the steel mill before it closed down. The grandmother, Ruth, shared stories about raising 5 children during harder times. Despite their circumstances, they radiated a dignity that Marcus found inspiring. But Emma was getting worse. Her breathing became more labored, and her tiny body felt burning hot against Ruth's chest. The baby's eyes rolled back, showing only the whites, and suddenly she went completely limp. "Harold!" Ruth's scream pierced the diner's atmosphere like a siren. "Something's wrong. She's not breathing right." The baby's lips had turned a frightening shade of blue, and her little chest barely rose and fell. Harold jumped up, his face pale with terror, while Ruth rocked Emma frantically, trying to wake her. "Call 911, someone shouted from across the diner. "What did you give her?" Harold turned on Marcus, his grief transforming into desperate anger. "What was in that milk?" Marcus stood frozen, his mind reeling. I just asked for regular milk. I didn't." "You poisoned her." Ruth wailed, clutching Emma's limp form. "You killed our baby." The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Around them, other diners began to murmur and point. The hostess, who had been watching from behind the counter, stepped forward with a vindictive gleam in her eyes. "I knew something was off about this whole situation," she announced loudly. "Street kid trying to play hero? He probably put something in that milk." "That's not true," Marcus protested, his voice cracking. "I would never hurt anyone. I was just trying to help." But his words were drowned out by the growing chorus of suspicion. A businessman in an expensive suit shook his head disapprovingly. "Kids these days, you never know what they're capable of." "Probably on drugs," muttered a woman at the counter. "Look at those clothes, that desperate look in his eyes." The paramedics arrived within minutes, their urgent voices and medical equipment creating chaos in the small diner. They worked quickly on Emma, checking her vitals and preparing her for transport. Harold and Ruth climbed into the ambulance, but not before Harold turned back to Marcus with eyes full of hatred. "If she dies, boy, her blood is on your hands," he spat. "We trusted you, and you did this to her." The ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing, leaving Marcus standing in the middle of the diner surrounded by hostile stares. The police arrived shortly after, their questions sharp and accusatory. Officer Martinez, a stern-faced woman in her 40s, took Marcus aside. "Son, I need you to tell me exactly what happened here," she said, her notepad ready. "These people are saying you gave something to their baby that made her sick." "I just bought them food," Marcus stammered, his hands shaking. "Regular food from the menu. I was trying to help them because they were hungry and the baby looked sick already." "Sick already?" Officer Martinez raised an eyebrow. "So you admit you knew something was wrong with the child?" "No, I mean, she looked like she had a fever when they came in. I thought maybe food would help, or the milk." Marcus's words tumbled over each other, making him sound more guilty with each explanation. The waitress, who had been so kind earlier, now looked at Marcus with uncertainty. "I don't know, officer. The whole thing seemed strange. Why would a kid with barely any money suddenly offer to pay for strangers?" "Because it was the right thing to do." Marcus cried out, but his voice was lost in the growing murmur of disapproval from the remaining customers. Officer Martinez took statements from several witnesses, each one painting Marcus in a more suspicious light. The businessman claimed he saw Marcus fidgeting with something before the couple arrived. The woman at the counter insisted she noticed him acting nervous and guilty throughout the meal. "I'm going to need you to come down to the station for more questions," Officer Martinez told Marcus, her hand resting on her radio. "Your parents need to be notified." "I don't have parents," Marcus whispered, the words barely audible. "Just me." The walk to the police car felt like a death march. Every step was witnessed by curious onlookers who had gathered outside the diner. Marcus could hear their whispered judgments, their assumptions about who he was and what he had done. The boy who had walked into the Golden Spoon diner with hope and $15 was gone, replaced by a suspected criminal whose only crime had been compassion. As the police car pulled away from the curb, Marcus caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window, hollow-eyed, defeated, and utterly alone. He had tried to do something good, something pure, and it had turned into his worst nightmare. The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. In a world where kindness was rare, he was being punished for showing it. The last thing he saw before the diner disappeared from view was the flickering neon sign, its broken letters casting an eerie glow on the sidewalk where his dreams had just died. What Marcus didn't know, what no one in that chaotic diner realized, was that someone had been watching everything unfold from the very beginning. In the corner booth, partially hidden behind a newspaper and wearing a simple gray sweater that disguised his true identity, sat David Chen, CEO of Chen Industries, one of Chicago's most successful tech companies. He had been having a quiet lunch, escaping the pressures of board meetings and million-dollar decisions, when the drama began. David had witnessed every moment, the elderly couple's desperate plea, the hostess's cruel rejection, and most importantly, Marcus's selfless sacrifice. He had watched the young man give up his only meal without hesitation, had seen the genuine care in his eyes as he interacted with Harold and Ruth. When the baby collapsed and accusations flew, David's heart had broken for the boy who was being crucified for his kindness. As the police car disappeared down Ashland Avenue, David quietly paid his bill and followed at a distance. His black sedan moved through the streets like a shadow, tracking the police vehicle to the station where Marcus would spend the next several hours being questioned, fingerprinted, and treated like a criminal. David parked across the street and made a phone call to his personal attorney, then another to the hospital where baby Emma had been taken. The hours that followed were a nightmare for Marcus. In the sterile interrogation room, he repeated his story over and over while detectives searched for holes in his account. They tested the milk container, analyzed the food remnants, and questioned every person who had been in the diner. Meanwhile, David used his connections and resources to quietly investigate the truth. By evening, Marcus was released pending further investigation, but the damage was done. Word had spread through his neighborhood like wildfire. Mrs. Rodriguez from the corner store looked at him with suspicion when he walked past. The teenagers who usually ignored him now whispered and pointed. Even Mr. Thompson, the kind old man who sometimes gave Marcus odd jobs, crossed the street to avoid him. Marcus climbed the 3 flights of stairs to his tiny studio apartment, each step heavier than the last. The space was barely larger than a closet, a mattress on the floor, a hot plate, and a small table that served as both desk and dining area. He collapsed onto his bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling, replaying the day's events in his mind. "I was just trying to help," he whispered to the empty room, his voice breaking. "Why did this happen?" Sleep came fitfully, filled with nightmares of accusatory faces and the sound of sirens. Marcus woke several times, his heart racing, wondering if the police would return to arrest him. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Ruth's tear-streaked face and heard Harold's words, "Her blood is on your hands." Meanwhile, David Chen was having his own sleepless night, but for different reasons. His team of private investigators had been working around the clock, and the preliminary hospital reports were starting to come in. Baby Emma was fighting for her life in the pediatric intensive care unit, but the initial blood work was revealing crucial information. At 3 a.m., David's phone rang. It was Dr. Sarah Kim from Children's Memorial Hospital. "Mr. Chen, I have the results you requested," she said, her voice tired but professional. "The infant has a severe case of bacterial meningitis. Based on the progression and symptoms, she's been sick for at least a week, possibly longer. There's no way the food or milk from today caused this condition." David closed his eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that Marcus would be cleared, anger that an innocent boy had been put through hell for trying to help. "Doctor, will the baby survive?" There was a pause. "It's touch and go. Meningitis in infants is extremely serious, especially when treatment is delayed. If they had brought her in even a day earlier." David understood. The delay caused by poverty, by lack of access to healthcare, by the very circumstances that had led the elderly couple to that diner in the first place, might cost Emma her life. The next morning brought a mixture of vindication and tragedy. The hospital's official report cleared Marcus of any wrongdoing, confirming that baby Emma's illness was completely unrelated to anything that happened at the diner. The local news picked up the story, but with a different angle now. The boy who had been wrongly accused of poisoning a baby had actually been trying to save her. But the vindication came too late for Emma. At 6:47 a.m., surrounded by Harold and Ruth, the tiny girl lost her battle with meningitis. The couple, devastated by grief and guilt over their accusations against Marcus, asked the hospital to contact him with their apologies. Marcus received the news while sitting in his apartment, staring at a bowl of cereal he couldn't bring himself to eat. The social worker who called was gentle but direct. Emma had died, the family was sorry for blaming him, and he was completely cleared of any wrongdoing. Instead of relief, Marcus felt only emptiness. A baby was dead, an elderly couple was destroyed by grief, and his act of kindness had somehow become entangled with tragedy. He wondered if he would ever be able to help someone again without fear of unintended consequences. The neighborhood's attitude toward Marcus began to shift as news of his innocence spread, but the damage to his spirit was profound. He barely left his apartment for the next 2 days, surviving on crackers and tap water, replaying every moment of that terrible afternoon. On the third morning, as gray October light filtered through his single window, Marcus heard something that made his heart stop, a firm, confident knock at his door. His first thought was that the police had returned, that somehow new evidence had emerged. His hands shook as he approached the door, his bare feet silent on the cold linoleum floor. Through the peephole, he saw a man in an expensive coat, someone he didn't recognize but who carried himself with unmistakable authority. Marcus's mind raced. Was this a lawyer? A detective? Someone from social services? He opened the door slowly, and found himself face to face with David Chen, though he had no idea who the man was. David's eyes were kind but serious, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to being heard. Marcus Williams? David asked, though he already knew the answer. My name is David Chen. I was in the diner 3 days ago. I saw everything that happened, and I think it's time we talked. Marcus stared at the well-dressed stranger standing in his doorway, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. You were there, he stammered, stepping back instinctively. In the diner? David nodded, his expression gentle but determined. May I come in? What I have to say is important, and I think you deserve to hear it. With trembling hands, Marcus opened the door wider, suddenly self-conscious about his tiny, sparse apartment. David stepped inside, his expensive shoes a stark contrast to the worn linoleum floor, but his face showed no judgment, only compassion. I was sitting in the corner booth, David began, settling carefully onto the single chair Marcus offered. I watched everything unfold from the moment that elderly couple walked in. I saw the hostess turn them away, and I saw you stand up. He paused, his voice growing stronger. Marcus, what you did in that moment, giving up your only meal, spending your last $15 on strangers, that wasn't just kindness. That was courage. Marcus sank onto his mattress, his eyes filling with tears he'd been holding back for days. But the baby died, he whispered. Emma died, and everyone thought I killed her. Maybe if I hadn't interfered, if I'd just minded my own business. Stop, David said firmly. Emma was already dying when that couple walked into the diner. The hospital confirmed she had bacterial meningitis, she'd been sick for over a week. If anything, your kindness gave her a few moments of warmth and comfort in her final days. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, but this time it was relief rather than pain. For 3 days, he'd carried the crushing weight of believing his good intentions had caused a tragedy. Now, for the first time since that horrible afternoon, he could breathe. Who are you? Marcus asked, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Why do you care what happens to me? David smiled, and for a moment, the successful CEO disappeared, replaced by someone who understood struggle and hardship. My name is David Chen. I run a company called Chen Industries. But more importantly, I'm someone who grew up not far from here, in circumstances not unlike yours. He gestured around the small apartment. 30 years ago, I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor, wondering where my next meal would come from. I was 17, just like you, when someone saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Marcus leaned forward, captivated despite his exhaustion. What happened? A businessman, a stranger, really, witnessed me returning a wallet I'd found instead of keeping the money inside. It wasn't much, maybe $40, but it was more than I'd seen in months. David's eyes grew distant with memory. He tracked me down, just like I tracked you down. He told me that integrity like that was rare, and he wanted to invest in it. Invest in it? He paid for my education, Marcus. All of it. High school completion, college, even graduate school. But more than that, he taught me that kindness isn't weakness, it's the strongest force in the world. It's what separates us from animals, what makes us human. Marcus felt something stirring in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years: hope. But I'm nobody special. I'm just a kid who can't even afford his own meals. David stood up and walked to the small window, looking out at the neighborhood where broken dreams and shattered lives were as common as potholes in the street. You know what I see when I look at you, Marcus? I see someone who had $15, probably all the money in the world to him, and gave it away without hesitation to help strangers. I see someone who faced false accusations and public humiliation but never once said, "I wish I hadn't helped them." He turned back to Marcus, his expression intense. Do you know how rare that is? In my world, I'm surrounded by people who have millions of dollars but wouldn't give a homeless person a sandwich. You had almost nothing, and you gave everything. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face again, but these were different tears, tears of recognition, of being truly seen for the first time in his life. I want to make you an offer, David continued, pulling out a business card and a sealed envelope. I want to pay for your education, not just high school, but college, graduate school if you want it. I want to give you the tools to build the life you deserve. Marcus stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. Why? What do you want in return? I want you to promise me something, David said, his voice soft but serious. I want you to promise that you'll never stop being the person who stood up in that diner. The world needs more people like you, Marcus. It needs people who choose kindness even when it costs them everything. With shaking hands, Marcus opened the envelope. Inside was a check that made his vision blur, more money than he'd ever imagined having. But more than that, there was a letter of acceptance to a prestigious preparatory school, and information about a full scholarship fund that had been established in his name. I don't understand, Marcus whispered. How did you arrange all this so quickly? David smiled. When you have resources, you can move mountains. But Marcus, this isn't charity. This is an investment. I'm investing in the kind of person who gives away his last meal to help a stranger. I'm betting that person will change the world someday. Marcus looked up at this man who had appeared like an angel in his darkest hour. What if I disappoint you? What if I'm not as good as you think I am? Then you'll be human, David replied simply. But I don't think that's going to happen. You see, I've been watching people for 30 years, and I've learned to recognize something special when I see it. That day in the diner, when everyone else was looking away or judging that elderly couple, you saw their humanity. When everyone else was ready to condemn you, you never once blamed them for their grief. David moved toward the door, then paused. There's one more thing, Marcus. Harold and Ruth. The elderly couple, they want to see you. They're devastated by what they said, by how they treated you. They're at Children's Memorial Hospital, sitting with Emma's body, and they asked specifically if you would come. Marcus nodded, understanding that this was part of his healing too. Will you come with me? Of course. As they walked down the stairs together, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the sense that he wasn't alone in the world. The boy who had entered the Golden Spoon Diner 3 days ago with $15 and a dream of a decent meal was gone. In his place was someone who understood that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to show kindness when the world seemed determined to punish it. Outside, David's car waited, not the flashy sports car Marcus might have expected, but a simple, elegant sedan that spoke of quiet confidence rather than showiness. As they drove toward the hospital, David spoke quietly about the future, about the school Marcus would attend, about the opportunities that lay ahead. But Marcus was thinking about Emma, about Harold and Ruth, about the mysterious ways that tragedy and blessing could intertwine. He was thinking about the man beside him, who had seen something worth saving in a moment when Marcus couldn't see it himself. Most of all, he was thinking about the lesson he would carry forward, that kindness, even when it seems to fail, even when it brings pain and misunderstanding, is never wasted. Someone is always watching. Someone always sees. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that someone has the power to transform your entire world. The car pulled into the hospital parking lot, and Marcus took a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next. He was no longer the hungry boy with $15. He was someone with a future, someone with purpose, someone who had learned that the greatest investment you can make is in another person's humanity. And somewhere in the city behind them, the Golden Spoon Diner continued serving meals to people who needed them, its flickering neon sign a reminder that even in the darkest places, light can still find a way to shine. True kindness is like a seed planted in winter, it may seem to die in the cold, but spring always comes. When we choose compassion over comfort, when we give even when we have little, we create ripples that touch lives in ways we may never know. Marcus learned that genuine goodness never goes unnoticed, that there are always silent witnesses to our acts of love. In a world that often rewards selfishness, be the person who gives their last meal to a stranger. Be the light that refuses to dim, even in the darkest moments. Your kindness matters more than you know. Don't forget to like this video if it touched your heart, subscribe for more inspiring stories, and share this with someone who needs to remember that goodness still exists in the world. Tell us in the comments. When was the last time you witnessed or showed unexpected kindness? Your story might inspire someone else to choose compassion over indifference.